I want really to talk about the theme of investment because Inez, for good or bad, encouraged me to speak more as an economist than as a social activist. I like to think I am both and have been both and remain both. So I'm trying to put on the harder hat to answer the question, why on earth should Ireland at this stage in its development invest more in adult basic education? And I want first just to clear my throat by saying it's not an easy sell. How good we have this week, how good there's no less a person than the President comes to open it, because there's not a lot of interest out there in raising the very lowest standards of literacy among our adult population. And there's not a lot of evidence that there's big financial returns to come from it. Where are most people's heads at? We are a third level country and becoming a lot more so. This chart shows you the number of 30 to 34-year-olds who have a tertiary education across the member states of the European Union. And Ireland is top of the class in 2012, with a bar on the very far right. So already the proportion of our 30 to 34-year-olds with tertiary education is way ahead of most other member states in the European Union. And the red tabs are where countries hope to be by the year 2020. We've all had to write our national reform programmes and tell the European Union that by the year 2020, this is what we hope to achieve. Ireland, by 2020, has set a target of 60%. We're going to be not just top of the class, we're going to be in a class of our own. And if our business is trying to encourage good investors to come into Ireland and create quality jobs, if we're trying to persuade a lot more people to hold our public debt, this is the sort of message we want to give. Who wants to tell the Americans that 23% of those aged 16 to 64 in Ireland don't have a completed upper secondary education, when in the United States the figure is 10%? We'd much prefer to tell them about this and to tell them that 51% of our young people now have a third level education, which is higher than in the United States at 45%. So this is the news we're trying to give, and this is the news we're not trying to speak too loudly. An example from the PX study to which the President and Inez have already referred, that the first forensic look across the advanced world, 24 countries participated, that said, listen, what can adults actually do 16 to 65 in numeracy and proficiency? And where do we come with just the example of numeracy? Near bottom of the class. Both our absolute score was below and the percentage of our adult population below level 1 on the numeracy scale was one of the highest in the 24 participating countries. So this is what we're up against. And my main observations are the following: how we make the hard case that this is a priority for the nation, for the economy, for our society. So my first point is that we have to accept there is muted interest. I doubt if we've anyone here from, dare I say it, from IBEC, from the food and agri industry, from tourism and the accommodation sector. Sadly, because this issue of numeracy and literacy is huge for important sectors of our economy. There is muted interest, and there are few clear sightlines. I'll go on to those immediately, just hanging my hat on some recent research that has looked extensively at what we know about what works in the area of adult basic education. I want briefly to say something that those in need of adult basic education now are relatively invisible. And there's no secular trend is going to do away with their presence. Thirdly, that their needs are not being picked up on effectively. And in fourth place, that successful interventions on their behalf are all too rare. Few clear sightlines. Here's a study that has just appeared. It's a literature review, and a very capable one, done by the OECD, that asks about what are the returns to investing in adult basic education. The first is that there is clear evidence of social returns, and happily cede ground here to those who are to follow me and speak about parental involvement in health. It is so important for so many dimensions of well-being that individuals have a good command of numeracy, literacy, and problem solving in technology-rich environments. So I'll say no more on that, but it extends into civic engagement, health, parenting, so many areas. However, it is also clear that the way in which, you might know more about this than I do, the way in which participation in adult basic education leads to higher proficiency is that it changes people's practices. It leads to them doing more and doing different things. And the build-up in proficiency occurs after programme. The real build-up in proficiency seems to occur after programme participation and takes time to be identified and establish itself. And thirdly, this is the bad news, evidence of economic returns to adult basic education tend to appear only for interventions on behalf of young cohorts, when there's still a significant tranche of their lives ahead of them for the advances in competency to bring its dividend, or their dividend, whereas returns from midlife learning are much less certain. And I draw your attention there to a second report, which I think has a little jewel for Ireland. This is a team that have inquired closely into what seems to account for the differences in what people earn when they're in their prime age between 35 to 54. It's called wage equation modelling, and they're very clever at it now, and they can sort of factor out the contributions to people's lifetime earnings. This team have identified that there are 2 countries in which the returns to cognitive skills are way ahead of other countries. And those 2 countries are the United States and Ireland. And their findings for Ireland are more intriguing still. They say if a person could have 54 more points on the PIAC numeracy scale, it has the same contribution in boosting their earnings as having been 2.5 years longer in school. So just think about that. Each being 2.5 years longer in school, or the independent effect, as in the jargon is called controlling for educational attainment, the independent effect of being 54 points higher on the numeracy scale is to boost earnings in later life by 20%. But as I say, the evidence is that this occurs primarily in the case of younger cohorts. Will the challenge of low numeracy and literacy skills, is it going to fade with time? This, I think, is one of the big cop-outs that our society has, that really we're dealing with the legacy of an older generation who left schooling when completing upper secondary wasn't the norm. And time is reducing their numbers. Here we see from the PIAC study, published in 2013, the top chart shows you the numeracy. They look at the blue and the brown. These are the proportions of those age groups that are at or below level 1 numeracy. And my point is that most of us think, it's up in the later age groups, It's the over 55s, the last two bars, that this is a very big phenomenon. And that's why we're supporting NAL, and that's why we want to see Literacy Awareness Weeks each year. It's largely on behalf of this older cohort. Important in all as that is, most of those bedevilled by seriously low numeracy still have at least 20 years ahead of them before reaching the age 65. That's the ring. And similarly for literacy, where it is 10-year age cohorts that are taken. Very large numbers of people are at or below level 1 literacy who also have some 20 years ahead of them potential participation in the labour market. This challenge is not fading with time. And if we look at other advanced countries, we realise, gosh, it is the same. Countries that moved much sooner than Ireland in expanding secondary education and making its completion the norm, also are delving into the questions as to why and how is it that so many people come through education and still have significant numeracy and literacy deficits. In Ireland, the 700,000 people who at the moment are at or below level 1 numeracy are distributed across the level of educational attainment in the following way. The two grey areas are the ones we might expect. The light grey, top left-hand corner, is 23% of the 700,000 people at or below level 1 numeracy have less than have primary education or less. A further 27%, the dark grey square, have less than an upper secondary, have only lower secondary. So just over half, just one half of the numeracy challenged did not complete their Leaving Cert or equivalent. But that means that one half of those who are now numeracy challenged completed not just their Leaving Cert, but in several cases a post-Leaving Cert or tertiary non-degree or tertiary itself. One half of the numeracy challenged in Ireland today have more than a Leaving Certificate. So the challenge is not fading away. The challenge, in a sense, is being replicated, is being fed with each cohort that comes out of the educational system. Are policies rising to the challenge? One indicator that we may not be rising to this challenge is the output of minor and major awards at level 3 on the National Framework of Qualifications. It had a huge dip in 2012, after which there was slight recovery before returning to a pattern of decline. I suggest there's significant evidence in that and in other forms to suggest that dealing with the very low numeracy and literacy skills of a large section of the population is not a huge concern motivating large parts of the educational sector. In fact, we might even have to challenge some ETBs as to what priority is currently being given to the needs of this section of the population. There are other straws, more than straws in the wind, that our policies are not up to the current challenge, and they're not realising how difficult to reach, how diverse and heterogeneous the population of the literacy and numeracy challenged are. We know that the National Skills Strategy to date has had least success in bringing people who are below level 3 on the NFQ to that level, whereas advancing people at higher levels to one step up has registered more success. So It's a challenge not going away, and we need to seriously ramp up the effectiveness of interventions. And I don't have much more time, and I just want to say that we need to become a lot more forensic about when interventions work and why they have worked, as this OECD review has sought to do. And they articulate quite clearly what, in their experience, which is looking across the advanced countries of the world, seem to characterize programs that achieve proportionately, for the investment in the program, advances for their learners. And I'm sure you'll tick off these 4 fundamental characteristics: that they motivate individuals to take part, that they convey basic skills effectively, that they encourage persistence, and in 4th place, that the basic skills acquired are sustained through use and not not lost through not being used. And I just, under their 4 characteristics of effective interventions, I put down those observations. Motivation. You all are aware of the negative perception of education that many of those who are in need of adult basic education can have. You're aware that they are poorly informed of the benefits of improving their numeracy and literacy skills. I've argued that at length in an article on the opportunities that are in the Irish labour market today for people with further education and training qualifications. There's also, as you know, a lack of belief in the relevance of what is being offered to them for them as individuals. This is not for me. And there's embarrassment at having to say, I am having difficulty and I am adopting what the President so, I think, eloquently described as these coping strategies to enable me to get by without having to admit that, in fact, I'm having huge difficulty in handling numbers or in reading. How you convey basic skills effectively. The professionalism, without necessarily the professional certificates, but certainly the professionalism of the instructors, mentors, teachers is critical. A huge factor seen to produce effects across advanced countries. Individually tailored programs. Inez has already witnessed the fact that if you are serving this relatively diverse, relatively invisible population, you have to customize. You have to provide your service in a variety of forms through a variety of channels. That assessment is important to understanding if something has worked, how much it has worked, and what can be done to improve it. But the assessment in adult education needs very much to be with the learner and not just of the learner. It is assessment for learning as well as of learning. And it needs to be transparently done. The difficulty adult learners have in completing their programs, the issues there are probably quite evident. They have busy lives. These are people managing households. 44% of them are in jobs. 44% of the numeracy challenge in Ireland are in jobs. There are barriers to participation arising if the course is full-time or if the course is being delivered in a location distant from their home. There's, in many cases, poor course selection. People being put into programs of a content or of a manner of delivery that is not suited to them and which they can't sustain. And finally, this key issue that skills not used are lost. And that the great challenge here in Ireland is that a large number of those who are difficult to reach because they're in work are in jobs where they are in a cycle of low pay or no pay. And we have good figures now that show the proportion of our workforce that churns between jobs that pay little and periods of unemployment. For them, in their jobs, and for their employers, there's a danger, there's little incentive to invest in improving skills. Because the business model, the way the corner shop runs, doesn't require a person to have significant improvement in numeracy or literacy skills. Inside such a sector as retail, there are some employers, and I have to say, and I don't mind using this, a company like Lidl, which really wants to invest in the skills of every member of its sales workforce, and then the proverbial corner shop, which if people don't like the hours being offered and can't avail, there'll be someone else who'll come along and do the job. So to ensure that skills acquired are used, we need to seriously raise our ambition for the quality of employment at the lower end of the labour market ladder. I'll end by saying that how do we find and reward providers who can do certainly these first three steps, and ideally the fourth as well, who can motivate learners, convey the skills effectively, ensure they complete the programme, and ensure that their practices as a result of what they've learned are changed. And I feel we've got to begin to ambition much more transparency in what is being achieved. We may even have to think of a type of momentum programme tailored for the adult learning sector, where you handsomely reward the providers that are seen and establish that they're doing the job. We've begun to introduce an element of payment by outcomes into the further education and training sector. We're about to do it into the public employment service. I don't want to give a blanket endorsement of such approaches in providing public services. In this area, if the outcome, that is to attract a reward, is properly measured, it would unleash a huge amount of creativity and, I believe, enable good practice to emerge and shine. Let me end by just saying that we've had, if I go back to the question of how effective are our policy interventions to date, we are aware, 18% of, say, the numeracy challenged now are unemployed. Currently, we are unfolding a programme called Job Path that will see every single individual who is long-term unemployed on the live register being referred to one of two new companies for help in getting back to work. And each of those two companies is led by a UK operator. And the UK experience has this to say to us. Before you decide how to help people, understand what their deficits are and how deep those deficits are. And in Britain, they beat their breasts and say, when we set up this programme, we didn't have a good classification system. We didn't say, listen, let's understand how deep your deficits are. Have you literacy deficits? And I'm afraid we're now unrolling this huge programme in Ireland, and we still haven't put that in place. And what an opportunity there is there, I'd suggest, for determined dialogue between NALA and the Department of Social Protection, between SOLAS and the Department of Social Protection. If nothing more was achieved by some of these private contractors than routing long-term unemployed people to programmes that substantially and significantly enhanced their numeracy and literacy skills, much could still be rescued. Thank you.